구독과 좋아요 눌러주세요.
학교 영어.
오늘 미스터 티클을 읽어보겠습니다.
자, 미스터 티클.
뜻을 잘 몰라도 발음이 안 좋아도 괜찮아요. 그냥 따라만 해도 영어랑 친해져요. 자, 그럼 쏭쏭이와 함께 쏭쏭!
It was a warm, sunny morning.
It was a warm, sunny morning.
In his small house at the other side of the wood, Mr. Tickle was asleep.
In his small house at the other side of the wood, Mr. Tickle was asleep.
You didn't know that there was such a thing as a tickle, did you?
You didn't know that there was such a thing as a tickle, did you?
Well, there is.
Well, there is.
Tickles are small and round, and they have arms that stretch and stretch and stretch.
Tickles are small and round, and they have arms that stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch.
Extraordinarily long arms.
Extraordinarily long arms.
Mr. Tickle was fast asleep.
Mr. Tickle was fast asleep.
He was having a dream.
He was having a dream.
It must have been a very funny dream because it made him laugh out loud and
It
then
mu-
woke him up.
It must have been a very funny dream because it made him laugh out loud, and that woke him
Woke him up! Woke him up!
Woke him up.
He sat up in bed, stretched his extraordinarily long arms, and yawned an enormous yawn.
He sat up in bed, stretched his extraordinary long arms, and yawned an enormous yawn.
Mr. Tickle felt hungry, so do you know what he did?
Mr. Tickle felt hungry. So, do you know what he did?
He reached out one of his extraordinary long arms, opened the bedroom door, reached down the stairs, opened the kitchen door, reached into the kitchen cupboard, opened the biscuit tin, took out the biscuit, brought it back upstairs, in through the bedroom door and back to Mr. Tickle in bed.
He reached out one of his extraordinary long arms, opened the bedroom door, reached the stairs, opened the kitchen door, reached into the kitchen cupboard, opened the biscuit tin, took out the biscuit, brought it back upstairs, in through the bedroom door and back to Mr. Tickle in bed.
As you can see, it's very useful indeed having arms as long as Mr. Tickle's.
As you can see, it's very useful indeed having arms as long as Mr. Tickle.
Mr. Tickle munched his biscuit.
Mr. Tickle munched his biscuit.
He looked out of the window.
He looked out of the window.
Today looks very much like a tickling day,
Today looks very much like a tickling day,
he thought to himself.
he thought to himself.
So, later that morning, after Mr. Tickle had made his bed and cooked his breakfast, he set off through the wood.
So later that morning, after Mr. Tickle had made his bed and cooked his breakfast, he set off through the wood.
As he walked along, he kept his eyes very wide open, looking for somebody to tickle.
And he walked along. He kept his eyes very wide open, looking for somebody tickle.
Looking for anybody tickle.
Looking for anybody to.
Eventually, Mr. Tickle came to a school.
Eventually, Tickle came to a school.
There was nobody about, so reaching up his extraordinary long arms to hit a high window ledge, Mr. Tickle pulled himself up and peeped in through the open window.
There was nobody about, so reaching extraordinary long arms to a high window ledge, Mr. Tickle pulled himself up and peeped in through the open window.
Inside he could see a classroom.
Inside he could see a classroom.
There was children sitting at their desks and a teacher writing on the blackboard.
There was a children sitting at their desk and a teacher writing on the blackboard.
Mr. Tickle waited a minute and then reached in through the window.
Mr. Tickle waited a minute and then reached in through the window.
Mr. Tickle's extraordinary long arms went right up to the teacher, paused, and then tickled.
Mr. Tickle's extraordinary long arms went right up to the teacher, paused, and then tickled.
The teacher jumped in the air and turned around very quickly to see who was there.
The teacher jumped in the air and turned around very quickly to see who was there.
But there was nobody there.
But there was nobody there.
Mr. Tickle grinned a mischievous grin.
Mr. Tickle grinned a mischievous grin.
He waited another minute
He waited another minute
and then tickled the teacher again.
and then tickled teacher again.
This time, he kept on tickling until soon the teacher was laughing out loud and saying, "Stop it! Stop it!" over and over again.
This time he kept on tickling until soon the teacher was laughing out loud and saying, "Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it," over and over again.
All the children were laughing too at such a funny sight.
All the children were laughing too at such a funny sight.
There was terrible pandemonium.
Pandemonium.
There was a terrible pandemonium.
There was a terrible pandemonium.
Eventually, Mr. Tickle thought that he had had enough fun, so he gave the teacher one more tickle for luck, and then very quietly brought his arm back through the open window.
Eventually, Mr. Tickle thought that he had enough fun, so he gave the teacher one more tickle for luck, and very quietly brought his arm back through the open window.
Chuckling to himself, he jumped down from the window, leaving the poor teacher to explain what it was all about.
Chuckling to himself, he jumped down from the window, leaving the poor teacher to explain what it was all about.
Which, of course, he couldn't.
Which, of course, he couldn't.
Then Mr. Tickle went to town.
Then Mr. Tickle went to town.
And what a day Mr. Tickle had.
And what a day Mr. Tickle had.
He tickled the policeman on traffic duty at the crossroads in the middle of town.
He tickled the policeman on traffic duty at the crossroad in the middle of town.
It caused an enormous traffic jam.
It caused an enormous traffic jam.
He tickled the greengrocer just as he was piling apples neatly in his shop window.
He tickled the greengrocer just as he was piling apples neatly in his shop window.
The greengrocer fell over backwards, and the apples rolled all over the shop.
The greengrocer fell over backwards, rolled, and apples rolled all over the shop.
At the railway station, the guard was about to wave his flag for the train to leave.
At the railway station, the guard was about to wave his flag for the train to leave.
As he lifted his arm in the air, Mr. Tickle tickled him.
And he lifted his arm in the air. Mr. Tickle tickled him.
And every time he tried to wave his flag, Mr. Tickle tickled him, until the train was 10 minutes late leaving the station, and all the passengers were furious.
And every time he tried to wave his flag, Mr. Tickle tickled him, until the train was 10 minutes late leaving the station, and all the passengers were furious.
That day, Mr. Tickle tickled everybody.
That day, Mr. tickled everybody.
He tickled the doctor.
He tickled the doctor.
He tickled the butcher.
He tickled the butcher.
He even tickled old Mr. Stamp, the postman, who dropped all his letters into a puddle.
He even tickled old Mr. Stamp, the postman, who dropped all his letter into a puddle.
Then Mr. Tickle went home.
Then Mr. Tickle went home.
Sitting in his armchair in his small house at the other side of the wood, he laughed and laughed every time he thought about all the people he had tickled.
Sitting in his armchair in his small house
At the other side of the
at the
wood.
other side of the wood, he laughed and laughed every time he thought about all the people he had tickled.
거의 끝났어요. 시작해서. So, if you are in any way ticklish, beware of Mr. Tickle and those extraordinary long arms of his.
So if you're anyway ticklish between of Mr. Tickle and those extraordinary long arms of his,
Just think,
just think,
perhaps he's somewhere about at this very moment while you reading this book.
perhaps he's somewhere about at his very moment while you are reading this book.
Perhaps that extraordinary long arms of his is already creeping up to the door of this room.
Perhaps that extraordinary long arm of his is early creeping up the door of his room.
Perhaps it's opening the door now and coming into the room.
Perhaps it's opening the door now and coming into the room.
Perhaps before you know what is happening, you will be well and truly.
Perhaps before you know what's happening, you will be well and truly.
Yum yum.
Tickle! Mr. Tickle!
Good.
구독과 좋아요 눌러주세요.